Bumpy Johnson did not pause at the doorway. He stepped through it as if it belonged to him, coat unbuttoned, hands empty, the room already deciding how his story should end tonight. 15 men sat scattered like judges, white hoods folded beside chairs, laughter loose and careless. They measured him by numbers, by skin, by the absence of anyone at his back. This was meant to be a lesson delivered loud. Bumpy felt the insult settle, heavy but familiar. He did not look for exits. He did not search faces for mercy. He listened, boots shifting, glasses clinking, breath thick with confidence. Violence hovered, impatient, waiting for permission. They expected anger or pleading, something sharp enough to justify what they planned to do. Instead, Bumpy stood still, eyes calm, giving them nothing but time. Time had always been his weapon. Every step he had taken to reach this room had already answered their threat. He had come alone because alone was the point. A crowd would have turned this into noise. Silence would make it permanent. The laughter kept rolling, growing bolder, pressing against him like hands. Bumpy let it pass through. He remembered Harlem watching him walk its streets, trusting him to never flinch, never beg. That trust stood beside him now, unseen, but solid. If blood came, it would come on his terms. If words came, they would weigh more than fists. For the moment he simply stood there, breathing slow, allowing the room to finish underestimating him. The night leaned forward, waiting, unaware that the balance had already shifted, that the quiet man, standing alone, had begun to own everything inside those walls before a breath fell. Bumpy did not need to speak for Harlem to enter the room. It came with him, carried in his posture, in the way he stood, without apology. Even here, far from his streets, his name had already arrived ahead of his body. Some of the men had heard it before tonight. They pretended they hadn't. Names like his made people uncomfortable when spoken out loud. They reminded men that power didn't always wear uniforms or hide behind numbers. Sometimes it walked in quietly and waited. Bumpy's authority was never built on spectacle. In Harlem, he had learned that loud men burned fast. The ones who lasted were steady, predictable, loyal. He had paid debts without being asked. He had punished betrayal without celebration. The neighborhood knew his rules because he lived by them first. That memory pressed into the room now, unseen but heavy. A few of the men shifted in their seats, unsure why their confidence felt thinner all of a sudden. Laughter faded in places, replaced by glances, calculations happening behind narrowed eyes. Bumpy looked at them one by one, not challenging, not submissive, just present. He knew how fear worked. It didn't arrive screaming. It arrived when men realized they were no longer controlling the moment. He thought of the people who trusted him to return home. Store owners who kept their doors open because his word protected them. Mothers who slept easier knowing someone stood between their children and chaos. That responsibility had shaped him more than any threat ever could. The men in this room mistook that weight for weakness. They saw restraint and assumed it came from fear. They didn't understand that restraint was the luxury of someone who knew exactly where he stood in the world. Bumpy had survived long enough to learn that power announced itself best by not announcing at all. He let his silence stretch, letting them fill it with their own doubts. Every second he said nothing, the balance tilted further. Harlem had taught him patience. It had taught him that respect, once earned, followed you into places it wasn't welcome. Tonight was proof of that lesson. Even surrounded, even mocked, he was not alone. His name stood beside him, solid and immovable, reminding everyone present that history had a way of showing up when invited or when ignored for too long. Confidence is loud when it has never been tested. The men across from Bumpy wore it like armor, brittle and bright. They joked, slapped tables, leaned back too far in their chairs, performing certainty for one another. Bumpy watched without expression. He read rooms the way other men read weather. He saw who needed approval, who followed laughter, who watched him too closely. Power always leaked through the cracks. One man laughed hardest. Another kept touching the folded hood beside him, as if reminding himself who he was supposed to be. A third avoided Bumpy's eyes altogether. None of that went unnoticed. They believed numbers decided outcomes. 15 against 1 felt mathematical, clean. They didn't understand that numbers only mattered when they were willing to act together. Noise hid hesitation. Confidence fed on itself until it starved. Bumpy let the pressure build. He understood provocation as a tool, not an insult. They wanted him angry, wanted motion they could answer with violence. Stillness denied them that permission. He thought about how men like this rose. They rose because no one checked them early, because communities elsewhere had been taught to look down, to stay quiet, to wait for mercy that never came. Bumpy had never waited. He shifted his weight slightly. The room noticed. Sound dipped, then recovered, thinner. A few men leaned forward now, curiosity replacing amusement. They were starting to feel the cost of misreading him. Bumpy's calm was not peace, it was preparation. He was measuring how far this could go without spilling blood, how to end it in a way that would travel beyond this room. Fear ended moments. Lessons lasted generations. The men mistook his patience for delay. They did not know he was already deciding who would walk away unchanged, who would carry this night like a bruise. Pressure does not need speed, it needs direction. By the time the laughter returned, it sounded forced. The room was working too hard. Bumpy remained still, eyes steady, letting them exhaust themselves. They had brought threat and insult. He was about to return clarity. He knew moments like this decided reputations long before fists flew. Men remembered how you made them feel when nothing happened. He intended them to remember standing small while he stood unchanged. The air grew tight, expectant. Somewhere outside, a car passed, unaware. Inside, lines were being redrawn. Bumpy kept his voice locked behind his teeth. Authority did not rush. It waited until everyone else ran out of places to hide. When the next sound came, it would not be laughter. It would be understanding, settling slowly, painfully, impossible to argue with. And with that understanding came the first crack in their unity, subtle but fatal, the kind that silence widens, leaving men exposed to their own fear. Stripped of bravado, they had borrowed from each other moments earlier tonight, alone, together. The disrespect stopped pretending to be playful. It sharpened. Words landed heavier now, aimed to strip dignity, to force a response loud enough to justify what they wanted to do next. Chairs scraped. A few men stood, stretching the moment, enjoying how it felt to surround something they believed was already broken. Bumpy did not react. He let the insults hit the floor and stay there. His stillness turned every slur into evidence. The room felt it, even if they couldn't name it. Noise was losing its grip. One man stepped closer, close enough to test distance, breath thick with arrogance. He waited for Bumpy to flinch. Bumpy did not. He looked at the man the way a judge looks at a sentence already decided. No anger, no fear, just certainty. That look unsettled him. He laughed again, louder than necessary, but it cracked halfway through. Others noticed. Mockery works only when it's shared. Now it was beginning to isolate. Bumpy's silence was doing its work. It forced each man to hear himself, to feel the weight of being watched by the others, wondering who would have to act first. No one wanted to be the one remembered for starting something that went wrong. He thought of Harlem, of moments when men tested him publicly, believing humiliation would weaken him. Those moments had taught him the same lesson every time. Dignity denied, a reaction became dignity multiplied. The crowd always turned on whoever looked desperate first. A chair tipped over behind him. The sound was meant to startle. Bumpy didn't turn. He didn't need to see it, to know it was a test. Tests only mattered if you acknowledged them. The men were calculating now whether they knew it or not. How far could this go before consequences followed them home, before whispers started, before questions were asked by people who didn't laugh as easily? Bumpy shifted his gaze, slow, deliberate, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. It wasn't a challenge, it was an inventory. He was letting them feel seen. Men who rely on masks panic when someone looks past them. The room tightened, Laughter had died completely. Even the boldest among them had gone quiet, waiting for direction that never came. They had wanted spectacle. Instead, they were trapped inside a mirror. Bumpy finally spoke, his voice low, measured, not raised. It wasn't a threat. It was a reminder of how nights like this ended when men mistook cruelty for strength. He didn't name consequences. He didn't need to. Imagination was harsher than anything he could say. What hurt most was that he spoke as if this outcome had always been obvious, as if their posturing had never mattered. Authority rested in that assumption. In the calm way, he treated their worst intentions as small. Public disrespect had failed. In its place stood discomfort, creeping and undeniable. They had tried to make him less. Instead, they had made themselves visible in ways they couldn't take back. Bumpy let the moment sit, letting the lesson settle deep. Whatever happened next would not be chaotic. It would be controlled. And control, once taken, was rarely given back. The room did not explode. It exhaled. 8 minutes passed without anyone fully aware time was moving at all. That was Bumpy's doing. He allowed the tension to stretch until it stopped feeling sharp and started feeling heavy. Heavy things changed shape under their own weight. He spoke again, briefly. Not to the loudest man, not to the closest. He addressed the room itself, as if the individuals no longer mattered. His tone was calm enough to feel permanent. He spoke of lines that didn't need to be crossed, of consequences that didn't need to be proven twice, of how men carried nights like this with them long after the doors closed. No one interrupted. Even the ones who wanted to found themselves unwilling to break the rhythm. Authority had settled in, quiet and absolute. Bumpy didn't threaten them with what he could do. He reminded them of what he already had. Friends, memory, reach. He spoke as someone who understood that violence was a language best used sparingly, because once spoken too often, it lost meaning. One man sat back down, then another. It happened without instruction, chairs easing into place like surrender disguised as comfort. The room reorganized itself around Bumpy's presence, not because he demanded it, but because resistance no longer felt worth the cost. Eyes lowered, breathing slowed. The laughter from earlier felt embarrassing now, like a childish thing overheard by adults. No one smiled. Bumpy finished speaking and returned to silence. That silence carried his final word better than anything else could. He let them sit with it, let each man decide how much of himself he was willing to risk tonight. Nothing violent happened because nothing needed to. Violence would have cheapened the lesson. What mattered was that they understood he could walk in alone and walk out unchanged, that he did not need to win loudly to win completely. When Bumpy turned toward the door, no one moved to stop him. A path opened without being asked for. Respect did that. Fear might have frozen them, but respect made room. He walked out the same way he had entered, steady, unhurried, hands still empty. Behind him, the room stayed quiet. Men staring at one another, realizing they had been measured and found unnecessary. The 8 minutes ended not with blood, but with something heavier settling in their chests. The knowledge that power did not need numbers. That authority, when real, did not announce itself. It simply arrived, rearranged everything, and left without asking permission. Bumpy Johnson did not look back when the door closed. He didn't need to. What mattered had already been left behind, pressed into the walls, carried in the silence of men who would never laugh the same way again. By morning, the story would change shape. It always did. Some would claim nothing happened. Others would swear something terrible almost did. What remained consistent was the feeling, a quiet understanding that boundaries had been drawn by a man who never raised his voice. Those men would return to their lives altered in small, permanent ways. They would hesitate before speaking too freely. They would remember the weight of stillness, the way confidence drained from a room without a punch thrown. Fear fades. Memory does not. Bumpy returned to Harlem with his name intact, strengthened by what he refused to do as much as by what he could have done. His community would never hear the details, and that was by design. Legacy was not built on stories told loudly, it was built on outcomes. Shopkeepers would open their doors the next day, unaware of the night's specifics, yet benefiting from it all the same. Children would walk streets protected by decisions made far away, by a man who understood that leadership meant carrying danger so others didn't have to. That was Bumpy's code. Protect the community, move with restraint, let inevitability do the work. He had learned long ago that violence made headlines, but control shaped history. Years later, when men spoke of power, this night would surface in fragments, a rumor, a warning, a reminder that authority could enter a hostile room alone and leave it rearranged. No blood, no chaos, just clarity. Bumpy Johnson became more than a man in moments like that. He became a measure, a standard others were judged against and found wanting. His legacy was not fear but order, not noise but balance. What walked out with him was invisible, but it lasted. Respect travels farther than threats, silence speaks longer than gunfire, and power, when rooted in community, does not need to announce itself to be remembered. That lesson endured, passed quietly between generations, shaping how power was recognized, how restraint was honored, and why his name remained spoken carefully, long after voices faded into history and memory of Harlem, forever unchallenged, undefeated.